Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, well, first I have to congratulate Amir Shalev and all that great team of people working in Yad Vashem who organized this unbelievable conference. And I'm glad that the army of educators, of teachers, of fighters for remembrance and tolerance is growing and strengthening in front of our eyes. It's very impressive, and everybody who contributed to make this conference possible deserves, of course, another round of applause. Dear friends, I thought I would be giving a lecture. I was invited to school, so I thought 45 minutes lecture, 15 minutes question and answers. I was told 15, 20 minutes, so I'll try to compress all this. But you know, I was working in a number of Israeli governments, and in fact, in my fourth government, I was responsible for, among other things, for coordination of the work or struggle against new anti-Semitism. And in fact, it happened to be one of the most exciting, I would say, works which I had. Because very quickly it became clear that it's very sad, but after Holocaust, after these awful lessons which humanity got, where anti-Semitism takes us, we are facing a new wave of anti-Semitism, which was more and more, very often was expressed, in fact, in unrestricted attacks on Israel. And then the question was, and the criticism was, of our opponents, that we are trying to confuse, to stop legitimate criticism of Israel by using the word anti-Semitism. And then I proposed the so-called 3D criteria. I said, like in classical anti-Semitism, demonization, delegitimization, double standard towards Jews was classical tools of peoples and states for many, many hundreds of years. Let's look and see if we see whatever criticism is about Israel, it's legitimate. Israel is a democratic country, open country, which is all built on criticism. Look in our newspapers today and read what is written about our prime minister, about our minister, politicians. Criticism is the base of our democracy. But if we see the same elements, thank you, Tada, of demonization, double standard, and the legitimization of the state of Israel, we can speak about anti-Semitism. And like in those films which many of us saw in our childhood, 3D films, you cannot understand anything before you put on the 3D glasses. And then suddenly the picture becomes clear. Apply this principle and you will see in many cases when something which looks like legitimate criticism of Israel, but the moment you find out the vicious elements of delegitimization, denial of the right of Israel to exist, demonization of Israel, and you know that that's classical anti-Semitism. So having prepared myself for the battles, I decided to have a tour all over American campuses, because it was discovered that one of the centers of these new type of anti-Semitism, unfortunately, are our universities of the free world. I can tell you that in the last few years, I visited 50 campuses, 40 universities in America and 10 in Europe. And I prepared myself before for very tough battles. And then I had very tough battles, debates, using different arguments, trying to find allies, building coalition of people who believe that it's very important to fight against anti-Semitism. But today I want to draw your attention to the very first question which was asked by, in the very first campus that I visited. This very first question was asked by a young Jew who got up and said, you know, for me it will be much easier to live if there will be no Israel. I don't understand why I have to be responsible for all what is happening there. More than this, why I have to be concentrated on all this Jewish stuff. As a Jew, as a moral human being, isn't I taught by our tradition that we have to deal with tikkun haolam, it's improvement of all the world? Don't we have to deal with the problems of all the world? Why to concentrate on one race, on one people, on one state? And then when I said, wait a minute, don't you know how the world looked without Israel? Don't you remember what happened in the Holocaust? He said, but the Holocaust, it just proves how awful is all types of nationalism. Don't we want to live in the world without nationalism, without all these prejudices? And that, of course, started a very interesting discussion. And I have to say that this question was with me practically in every place. Because when you're going through the surface of the first polite exchanges, or some tough political exchanges by some representatives of some not so democratic countries, and the moment you go a little bit deeper, you find out that one of the major questions which so many people, students, and in general people of the free world have is, why do we need nationalism? Why do we need identity? In fact, the whole generation of my generation, the next generation, in 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, for them almost anthem was the great song of John Lennon, Imagine. Imagine the world without nations, without religion, without state, the world where there is nothing to die for. And that's not something new. That's really very powerful and appealing idea. If you don't want Holocaust, if you don't want ethnic cleansing, if you don't want this awful racist, nationalist, colonialist, and other phenomena, let's go above all these national and religious prejudices. It's interesting, if you look at the song of John Lennon, or many of leading liberal philosophers of modern time, you understand that for them, identity and freedom are in confrontation. The more freedom you have, the less you must have identity. But the same is true, I'm sorry for this comparison, to the leaders of Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda. What they're saying it again and again, they said it many times. If you look on Google, you'll find hundreds of expressions like this. We will destroy you because we love death and you love life. Because you are not ready to die for anything. You understand, on one hand, we have the dream to have the world where there is nothing to die for. And that's good, it's a world of freedom without identity. On the other hand, there are people who are saying, because we have strong identity, and we are ready to die for it, we will destroy you because you are not ready to die for anything. What is in common? In common is that in both cases, people think that identity, religious, ethnic, belonging to community, and freedom, it's two different things. They have to fight. I have to say, I personally know that it's wrong, that it's not true, that identity and freedom have to go together, that identity without belief in democracy and freedom can bring us to totalitarianism and to fundamentalism, but democracy without identity will be decadent and weak. And how I know that they have to go together? Because I have unique experience of myself and my generation. We were very lucky. We were deprived of both freedom and identity. In the Soviet Union, and I want you to understand, I was born few years after Holocaust. And I was born and I lived all my childhood in the killing fields of Holocaust. And I grew and I knew nothing about my Jewishness, about my history, about my religion, about the state of Israel, and nothing about Holocaust. I knew that many members of my family were killed, but it was a part of big struggle between Hitler and Stalin. Knowledge about Holocaust was also deprived from us, because it was clear that it will be part of our identity, and in Soviet Union, Soviet regime, Soviet ideology, we were fighting against any identities. So I was deprived of it. The only Jewish thing in my life, in my childhood, was anti-Semitism, which was official. So you know that you have some restrictions. And all what you want as a result, you're helpless to fight all this. You try to escape in some kind of tower of, ivory tower of science, of art, of music, chess, something where you can be somehow protected. On the other hand, I, as all Soviet people, of course, was deprived of freedom. I was supposed to say what officials are tell us to say, to read what is permitted to read, to vote as it's supposed to vote. Typical Soviet citizen. When I found strength to speak my mind freely, only when I discovered my identity. It happened after the 6-day war, when suddenly, when we knew very little about what's happening, and the phrase, the Temple Mount is in our hands, which was like the phrase of that war. Temple Mount, the word Temple Mount said nothing to me. I didn't know what it is. Hardly I knew what Jerusalem is. But you suddenly see that the world around you, people around you, anti-Semites also, those who hate you, start changing their attitude. They start treating you with more respect. And then you find out that whether you want or not, but for people around you, you are connected to that state about which you know almost nothing. And then I, as many in my generation, many Jews who were absolutely assimilated, started learning about our history, about our past, and suddenly you find out that if you look at yourself as part of much bigger story of Exodus, which started 3,000 years ago from Egypt, and if you look at yourself as part of people who express solidarity all over the world, and as the one who has your own state, then suddenly you have strength to speak your mind and to say for the first time in 20 years that you live what you really think. So the power to become free came only together with identity. And with this, I went also to prison. And in prison, I discovered two more very important things. In prison, KGB is, some of you have the right already to forget it, that there was world when there was Soviet totalitarian regime, and there was secret police called KGB. They are trying to explain me, from the very first day of my arrest, that you'll be killed if you will not cooperate with us, if you will not say publicly that we are right and you are wrong. And it is pity. You are so young, you are so talented, you have a beautiful wife in Israel. They were giving me many compliments, more than I hear now. You know, a lot of compliments, because isn't it the most important thing in your life, to protect your life, to save your life? And very quickly understand that if your aim will be physical survival, you'll be finished. They'll break you. They'll force you to cooperate. Because there is no justification to continue struggle if the most important thing is physical survival. And only when you put yourself in something in the context where physical survival is an important thing but not the most important, where there are people, things which are more important for you, the freedom of your people, the victory in that historical struggle, to be on the path of history of struggling for freedom and not the history which is written by KGB. Only when you put it in that much bigger context, only when you mobilize all your solidarity with your identity, feeling of connection with history, you have strength to say no to KGB. And something no less important was, who are the people on whom you can rely there in prison? KGB wants that everybody will suspect everybody. How can you know that these people are really your allies with whom you can go on hunger strike and protest and not informers? And very quickly you find out that there is only one criterion on which you can rely. The stronger is the identity of these people, their nationalism, their religious feelings, loyalty to their community, whether it is Pentecostals, whether it is Catholics from Lithuania, whether Russian monarchies, Ukraine, they all dream about different worlds. But if they are all linked with the desire to live in a free society, of course it's very important, they are devoted to the idea of freedom because they suffer from living in non-free society. If they believe in free society, and there are values for which they are ready to die, for their identity, their belief, their faith, then they are your allies. And that's something what I took as my experience from prison, and that's something which is very important also in the free world. And unfortunately, it's very often forgotten. There were two major attacks on identity in the modern history. One, of course, was Marxism. And you know, Marxism, the idea of Marxism was that all these identities is something which only stops us from the main progressive struggle of proletarian for equality of all the world. So religion, as Marx said, was opium for the people, and nationalism is prejudices which capitalists are using in the struggle. So we have to erase all this. And I lived in the country which tried to erase all this and killed tens of millions of people to destroy identities. In one day, Soviet leaders stopped this policy. When it happened? When Hitler attacked Russia. When Stalin suddenly was deceived, he just now signed such a great agreement with Hitler, started dividing the world. In fact, started playing a role in assisting Hitler, even in implementing some of his most awful plans. And here Hitler deceived him and attacked. Stalin disappeared for 2 days, and then reappeared, and all rhetorics and all politics was changed. The religious leaders who were not yet killed were brought back from Siberia and were put as the leaders of the patriotic religious movements. Institutions of Russian patriotism were already established. The special awards in the name of Russian tsars and Russian great military leaders were brought. Official anthem was replaced. The anthem about the great international proletarian revolution was replaced with the anthem about great Russia, which is uniting all the world. Why? Because what was understood immediately, there is no way that you can make people fight against Hitler in the name of some abstract solidarity of proletariat. They will be fighting for their family, for their people, for their religion, for their country, for their history. And if you look down not on the dictators, what dictators were saying, but what were saying the leaders of the free world, on the speeches of Churchill, de Gaulle, Roosevelt, how they were fighting against this awful threat to the world. They were fighting, appealing to the identity of their people. That's why, what I want to say that not only identity is not an enemy of the freedom, not only identity is something what is bringing us to new Holocaust, but in order to fight against these awful things, for real freedom, we must have strength which we can get from our identity. The second big attack on identity was, of course, after the Second World War, when it was decided that now, as a result of these wars, we have to learn the lesson, we have to overcome all this prejudice, and the theories of post-nationalism, multiculturalism, entered and started working. And then suddenly, after 2 generations of trying to build some post-identity unity of Europe, suddenly there is one after another books. I don't need to retell them these books which appeared only in the last few years about in what awful situation Europe is. What happened? Great Europe, hundreds of millions of people, the most powerful democracies in the world, such deep, such strong, such devoted to their democracies people. And there are 40, 50 million Muslims who came. From them, maybe there are 10, 20,000 fundamentalists. And it looks, under official estimations, maybe there are some thousand terrorists. How it can be that Europe suddenly feels itself so helpless, as in one after another books, articles, they're writing? Because as one journalist said, we learned all these years how to enjoy freedom, we didn't learn how to fight for freedom. Because you find out that when you have society, big, strong society which believes in democracy, but which erases its identity, tries to get rid of it, to decide that all this is prejudices. And on the other hand, there is a small group of people, but first of all, which has no devotion to democracy. Nobody asks them. The ideas of multicultural society that behave as you want, it's your own business. But also, not only nobody asks it, but they have very strong identity. And then you find out that the group of people with strong identity, without any respect to democracy, can blackmail the whole free world if this world doesn't have power, determination, commitment to fight. And that's, I will not go into many other examples which you can read in my last book, Defending Identity. But I have to say that it also has direct connection, of course, with what's happening in Israel and what's happening about Israel. There is a lot of theories, which, as I saw in many campuses, are not only theories, but beliefs, that the best way to overcome all this prejudice and passions is that Israel should stop being national Jewish state. Who needs national Jewish state? Why not to have the state of all the citizens? You know how many students and professors were telling me, it's so nice, you Democrat, you were the leader, one of the leaders of human rights movement of the Soviet Union. Your teacher is Andrei Sakharov. How can it be that you prefer Jewish national state and not democratic state of all the citizens? And I have to say again and again that, first of all, by definition, democratic state is the state of all the citizens. Israel is definitely the state of all the citizens in the meaning that it is the only place, or the only country here in the region where all the citizens have all the basic rights. But national state is something what connects people with tradition, with history, gives them commitment to one another, gives them strength to fight for their national ideals. And if you want to defend, to protect this island of freedom and democracy in the Middle East, and of course everybody says, of course we want to protect the island of freedom and democracy, you have to support the idea of national state, which will have all its tradition, all its passion, all its energy, fighting for defending its freedom. And of course, at the same time, nobody should try. Identity should be restricted by the rules of freedom and democracy, but nobody should try to destroy identities. And I have to say that when many European countries passed the law banning the veil, so that Muslim girl cannot go to public school in veil, because it is believed that what will strengthen the society, because it will erase differences and so on, I think the result can be only opposite. That people whose identities are restricted in those places where there is no need in it, where there is no contradiction with the rules of democracy, with the respect of democracy, are becoming the enemies of the state, are becoming double thinkers, becoming those who say one thing and do the other. Thanks God in America, when there was also the case in one school, there was attempt to prohibit the Muslim girls to go with veil. The Supreme Court took the side of girls and not of the school. Because that is understood, well, we can go back into the history to show why, that public space is not neutral space, as some leaders of Europe try to create. Public space is shared space. And only when we are giving enough room for all people to express their identities, accepting the rules of freedom and democracy, we can have a very powerful camp of people struggling for peace, struggling against prejudices, struggling against awful crimes of racism, and struggling in order to prevent new Holocaust. And I'm sure that your conference made a very important contribution for this. Thank you.